The other day, on his own, he looks at me and says, Dad, is that why they put celebrities in commercials for this bad food? Because they want people who really, really like celebrities to think that the food is good. And if the celebrities
Wow.
like it, it must be good. Like, exactly right. And he came up with that on his own. And I'm like,
Wow.
it's moments like that where I'm like, yeah, we're doing this right by adopting this sort of self-directed learning approach where you just guide them towards things that they naturally feel a tendency to want to learn.
When it comes to quote unquote alternative health and wellness, I don't think any of us in this space got here because we thought it would be fun. Most of the people that I've talked with have come to this line of thinking and rejecting mainstream medicine because something tragic happened to ourselves or a loved one. Alec Zeck is no different, and he has an amazing story to tell about how he got to where he is now as a top 5% podcast host and the leader of his community, The Way Forward. I'm so excited to share this conversation that I had with Alec, where we talked about so many different topics from alternative parenting to, of course, his thoughts on Contagion Theory to the telepathy tapes and how our children are so in tune and brilliant. I know you're going to enjoy this one. It's a long one, so make sure to head down to the show notes to follow Alec if you're not already. Check out his community, The Way Forward. And if you want to hang out with Alec and I in person, make sure you check out the link for Confluence. The tickets are on sale right now, and the event is happening on May the 7th through the 12th, I believe, or the 8th through the 12th. I don't know. I'm going to be there. So if you want to come hang out with us in May, make sure you check that out down in the show notes as well, and enjoy this conversation. When it comes to your overall health, the health of your teeth and the products that you use in your mouth are typically an afterthought for most people. But recently, fluoride has been coming to center stage in the news, and there is a lot of talk around fluoride being an endocrine disruptor, a thyroid disruptor, and causing a lot of health issues. So what on earth are you supposed to use for your teeth? Because most conventional toothpastes contain fluoride. Well, I have really been enjoying the Wellness toothpaste. It is a naturally whitening toothpaste and it contains hydroxyapatite, which is a mineral that your teeth are actually made of, and it helps to remineralize your teeth. It is B Corp certified, which is a lengthy and detailed process to be approved as B Corp, and shows their commitment to the environment, community workers, and customers. It contains aloe vera, which eliminates disease-causing bacteria, whitens teeth, and reduces staining. Green tea is also shown to fight bacteria that leads to tooth decay. You can check out Wellness with the link in the show notes. We have special bundles for our listeners only, and it's something I've really been enjoying and recommend. So make sure to head down to the show notes and check out Wellness and their fantastic toothpaste. To try Wellness and get an exclusive listener discount, go to wellness.com/Sarah K. That's WELLNESSE. You can also check out the link down in the show notes. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm super excited to have here on the show Alec, who I had the pleasure of flying out to be on his podcast last summer. And we've kept in contact ever since. So I'm like, this is long overdue. Thank you for being here, Alec.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I can't believe you were here last summer. It
I
feels
know,
like
right?
both 2 years ago and like a month ago at the same time. Like
Yeah.
time is so distorted right now.
Yeah, I agree. It's like a time dilation. It's
Yeah.
it's very crazy. Yeah, we
Yeah.
had a really fun time and ended up getting to go out with you and Kylie, and we probably could have stayed out. I felt like we were out till like 10 o'clock at night, which is like way late for me, but that was so much fun to connect in that way.
Yeah, and there's so many good restaurants in Austin. That's why one of the reasons I really love living here is if you're a foodie, but you're also health conscious, then you can easily find places that account for both. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a cool place for sure. I wish I could have stayed longer. But yeah, excited to chat. And I figured, I'm going to be at your event in May, which it's February now of recording this, but we'll put all the links and information to that in-person event in May. So I definitely want to talk a little bit about that, how that came about. But just to back up, how did you get into all this stuff that you do now? And I know we'll talk a little bit about virology, but let's just back up to the beginning of your origin story.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to give an abbreviated version of that because if I gave all the details, this would be like a 6-part series. But the abbreviated version is my mom and also my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, had been under the care of conventional allopathic experts, so to speak, for quite some time. My mom more on the psychiatric side of things, and then my wife on the autoimmune rheumatology side of things. And basically, for half of my childhood, my mom was on psychotropic medications, benzodiazepines and SSRIs of various types. And she started on those pills basically as a result of multiple psychiatrists telling her that's the way that we approach these mental health issues that you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And her health spiraled downward over the course of nearly 9, almost 10 years. And when I say spiraled downwards, she had a lot of trauma and she had what you could call mental health issues. But again, I've come to the conclusion that overwhelmingly, if not exclusively, those are the results of trauma, just emotional trauma, et cetera. And when she got on these psych drugs, her health drastically changed in that in her down moments, she was hallucinating, walking through the halls, seeing ghosts at night, in and out of psych wards, multiple suicide attempts, shaking violently with akathisia. It was pretty gnarly to witness as a child. And then my wife, again, we started dating when we were 16, so we've been together for half of our lives now. And the entire time I had known her, she had been under the care of multiple rheumatologists for, quote, lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And of course, they told her that she would always be this way. She'd always have to deal with these chronic issues and she'd have to manage them with immunosuppressive drugs, which of course led to side effects, which led to more drugs, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And in 2016, all this kind of came to a head with my mom, where we were actually looking at permanently institutionalizing her because we had seen so many moments of, oh, she appears fine, and then everything sort of collapses and she's basically not there at all. And it was getting worse and worse because she had come to understand that it was the psych drugs that were perpetuating the issue at the least, but didn't have any resources to withdraw or get off of them appropriately. So she just cut cold turkey, which made it way worse. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that whole year from 2015 through 2016, again, was just incredibly dark. And I happened to be graduating from the United States Military Academy at West Point in May of 2016. And like I said, looking at institutionalizing my mom at this point. But she happened to be seeing a therapist who was reading a new book that had just come out called A Mind of Your Own by Dr. Kelly Brogan. And this therapist basically recommended to our family, like, look, you guys have tried everything else. You might as well just try this approach. This lady, Kelly Brogan, has a practice in New York. Kelly still had her license and a practice in New York at the time. And I just happened to be graduating from West Point in New York. Wow. And before Kelly's book really took off to where her waiting list was 1 to 2 years, my mom was able to get in to see Kelly. And that changed the entire trajectory of our family's lives because my mom began healing for the first time ever, really, after adopting Kelly's very natural approach to health. You know, nothing crazy, right? All the things that you talk about on your show. Didn't call it quantum biology or circadian rhythm health at the time, but that's essentially what it was, right? And of course, considerations for diet and detoxifying from eating ultra processed foods and things like this. But after seeing my mom begin to heal, we decided to try the same approach with my wife. And in a matter of 3.5, 4 months, she was off all of her meds, was feeling better than she had ever felt. I have different opinions now on blood tests, but at the time, just for the sake of the position we were in, she got her ESR tested, which is the inflammation levels in her blood, and they were normal for the first time in nearly 10 years, wow. Which was shocking to us. And I think the most shocking piece, though, was that when her rheumatologist came in and said, wow, your blood work looks awesome. it looks like whatever drugs we have you on are working great for you, so let's stay on those. And we, of course, told him, actually, she's not on any drugs. She's tapered off all of them and she's feeling better than she's ever felt. And there was no intellectual curiosity after that. There was no, oh my goodness, tell me more. How did this happen? It was sort of a shoulder shrug and, pouty mouth, and said, looks like you don't need me anymore. And then we were out of his office. And so for me, this was back in 2016, right when I had commissioned as an officer in the U.S. Army, right after I had graduated from what I now call the world's preeminent government indoctrination camp, United States Military Academy at West Point. I mean, there's a lot of great things about it, don't get me wrong. And I'm very grateful and somewhat still proud to have gone to an institution like that and, done fairly well. And at the same time, it is very much so a government indoctrination camp, and probably the preeminent one in the world. So after seeing these two people I love drastically heal from what the so-called experts said they would always suffer with, and my mom was basically on her deathbed, right?
Wow.
It was just an insane amount of cognitive dissonance that I was put in immediately, because that led me to questioning everything, because inevitably, as you're questioning at the very least nutrition and psychotropic medications, you can't not start questioning the FDA, which then leads you to question the government itself, which leads you to question 9/11 and all the things. So by the time 2020 came around, luckily I'd never had to serve in combat in the Army, and I was in this unique position in this program in the Army called the U.S. Army World Class Athlete Program. So I was basically just training as an athlete for 2 years, separate from the rest of the Army, which really afforded me the opportunity to really separate myself from the herd mentality, so to speak, and really deepen my research and exploration of myself and heal my trauma, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time 2020 came around, I had already done a tremendous amount of research and things like this, but didn't know what I wanted to do next, knowing that I needed to get out of the Army when my minimum requirement was up in May of 2021. And that's exactly what I did. But I basically started using my social medias, where I was previously just posting pictures of myself and my family to family and friends that I had, to start raising awareness to my perceptions on what was going on in 2020, and grew a following, and naturally felt right to start a podcast and then a health freedom organization and all these things. And so that's why I do what I do now. It's pretty surreal. And I just followed the proverbial bouncing ball, as my friend, Dr. Larry Pilevsky says. So that's why I'm here.
I love that. And I was just talking about this on Instagram the other day. I don't know anyone who's kind of gotten into this that hasn't had a family member or a really close friend or themselves that have been severely injured or damaged by this, quote unquote system. They don't just say, hey, I think I'm going to go down this rabbit hole because it sounds fun. Maybe in 2020, some of that started, but your story with your mom and then with Kylie, it's like, once you see that and you see if they continue to go down this traditional path of what the medical establishment gives us, they're basically going to end up dead or just medicated, until they're dead from the medication side effects. It's just wild, that's how so many of us have to get here. It was because it was like a life or death situation,
Exactly. Like none of us, virtually none of us, I guess you could say, decided I want to go against the grain and piss off all my family members and friends and have limited job opportunities and things. No one thinks that ever.
No, they don't. Yeah. And my family still thinks I'm completely insane. And they look at me and they're like, yeah, that's, they're in the club, as Tom says, there's a club, there's a school, it's a religion that you get bought into when you subscribe to the mainstream school of thought with, like, it's everything, just go to, and you do that on your podcast. It's like, oh, there's another rabbit hole that you can always go down. And, it's cool that you've been able to build what you have. And I'm excited to come out there in May for Confluence. What's that all about? How many years have you been doing that? And how did that come about?
Man, that's a really good question. So this will be our third year for Confluence, and it started as an eclipse festival. And
Mm.
that's why our logo is kind of harkening back to that with the little C and O looking like a sun and a
Okay.
moon eclipsing. Because of the eclipse that occurred both in October of 2023 and then an additional one in April of 2024. The property that we do Confluence on a regenerative farm just outside of San Antonio happened to be in the direct path of both eclipses. I don't know if you remember
Ah.
the images that were being shared of like the X that is over Texas and everyone was freaking out because Musk is in Texas and he owns X and there's an eclipse over that spot.
Oh.
Yeah, we didn't buy into any of that nonsensical fear, especially after the first eclipse, because we had such an incredible gathering. But it was basically, I used to run another health freedom organization called Health Freedom for Humanity, and we had chapters in 22 states and 3 countries.
Wow.
And I have shut that down. I shut that down in August of 2022 for a variety of reasons. And at the time, though, back in 2022, our California chapter partnered with Molly Englehart, who her family founded Cafe Gratitude and then also Sage Vegan Bistro in the California area, two really big farm to table restaurants. And we decided to partner with them on our California chapters event on her farm in California. And it was such an incredible experience. And for a number of reasons, she had to depart California and move her whole farming operation to Texas. And when she found out that her property was in the path of the eclipse, she hit me up and said, "Hey, let's do another event here." And I want to give a huge shout out actually to Music and Sky and Mike Winter from Alphabetic, because they've run a festival that they started sort of in response to festivals all being shut down at the beginning of 2020 and
2020.
2021.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they decided to run a really cool festival, and it's like a merging of arts and a music festival and a farmers market and a retreat and a conference all kind of in one thing together. And I grew up as a music festival junkie, and I've been to health freedom conferences. I put on health freedom conferences, but seeing those two combined with a retreat vibe and a farmers market all in one place is really incredible. So we sort of took what Music and Sky had done in California and decided, let's try to do the same thing in Texas. And that's what we've created. So we're now in our third edition. Unfortunately, we don't have an eclipse for you. I hit up God and asked him, but I don't think he can make that happen this time. But it really is such an incredible event. Again, all the food during the event is regeneratively raised or grown on site or by local farms. There's workshops, there's lectures, there's a giant magnesium rich pond on site that looks like it should be in the Caribbean because the water is like crystal blue because of the magnesium. Wow. Camping, glamping options, 4.5 full days. And our lineup this year, we are just absolutely so stoked for, both on music, workshop leaders, and lectures. It really is just an incredible event. And I think more than all of that, the most important thing in my I'm biased on this because community is everything for me. It's the community. It's the like-minded people. I'll be honest and say that last Confluence and the Confluence before that, and then also anytime I go to Music and Sky, I barely attend any of the talks. I'm more so there to connect with like-minded community.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what's amazing about it, is connecting with like-minded community, people who just get it. And yeah, it's an awesome event to put on, and I'm so stoked this year to have you and so many other amazing people.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people that listen to the podcast maybe encounter. And I get a lot of feedback just on different social platforms that I'm a part of, people just feeling like alone. And I definitely feel that here where I live. We're trying to get out of the city, but you don't really meet a lot of people that kind of are on that wavelength and think that way. Like a lot of people are just kind of still stuck in just believing what they're told and going down that path. And so I can imagine it'd be nice to be around people who get it,
Yeah, it is. It's really incredible.
A lot of people are quick to talk about the benefits of sunlight, but what gets often missed in the conversation is the benefit of darkness and the importance of protecting yourself from blue and green light after sunset. That is why I choose Viva Rays as my go-to source for protecting my circadian rhythms. You can use the code YOGI to save 15% off at Viva Rays. Now, you may have seen some of these studies popping up. I call them fear mongering about blue blockers not being effective. And that is a partial truth, because when you use blue blockers that are clear or that have not been tested with a spectrometer to actually block what they say they do, they will not protect your circadian rhythms. And they are not catching those key wavelengths that you need to be blocking in order for your body to be able to repair, for you to make melatonin, which is a master antioxidant. And artificial light at night has been in the scientific literature extensively linked to a host of hormonal cancers, obesity, diabetes, and all sorts of metabolic issues. That, again, is why I choose Viva Rays as my go-to source for protecting my circadian rhythms to allow my body to get adequate darkness at night. You can use the code YOGI to save 15% over at Viva Rays, and you can actually trust that they block the frequencies of light that they say they do. Thanks to Viva Rays for sponsoring today's podcast. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know I'm a huge fan of red light therapy for improving skin health, mitochondrial health, and just boosting your overall energy. I often get asked if the red light therapy face masks are worth it. And to be honest with you, I am really, really choosy when it comes to red light therapy face masks because of two issues. Number one, a lot of the masks actually have really high non-native EMF, which can actually denate any benefits that you're giving your mitochondria. And you really don't want a lot of non-native EMF so close to your head. Number two, a lot of the masks don't really use the therapeutic wavelengths that are shown to improve skin health, boost collagen, and have a therapeutic benefit on skin. So that's why I really like the Bond Charge mask. I've tested it with my meter. It is very low EMF, very safe for the face. And they use the targeted wavelengths that have been shown to improve skin, to boost collagen, and to just help you get that overall glow that you are looking for with a red light therapy mask. Check out the Bond Charge red light therapy mask. You can use my code Sarah Kleiner, all one word, to save. There's a link down in the show notes. It's very easy to use, easy to clean, and it actually works and it's safe. Hope you enjoy.
First off, I want to say I'm thoroughly convinced there are a lot more like-minded people than we realize. We just haven't had an appropriate way or a really easy way to connect with our like-minded community. And luckily we're creating that with the way forward. We're launching that here soon, which will be incredible. And we can talk about that at the end if it's
absolutely
relevant. But what I really love about this event relative to other health freedom conferences and things like that is because it's more of a relaxing festival vibe, and we emphasize CYOA, which is choose your own adventure. Meaning that we have multiple things going on at once. Like we have a healing tent where you can go get massage, chiropractic, biofield tuning. But then we also have, like I said, that big pond. And then we have farm tours going on, and then music going on, and workshops going on, and then lectures going on, kind of all at the same time. It really allows people to sort of let loose and be themselves and not have to wear like a suit and tie or a nice collared shirt at a conference. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I've put on conferences and attended conferences quite a bit, but there's just something about being out in nature on a regenerative farm with like-minded community, with music and all the elements that I named, that just makes this so unique and special. And I mean, when we announce our ticket sales each year, we immediately see like a large chunk of purchases come in, and every single one of them is past attendees that are like, I am coming back again for sure, because it's just an incredible, incredible experience.
Nice. Well, I'm definitely excited about it. And I guess just talking about the whole community that you're involved in, I feel like you're a little different than some of the, I don't know, there's been a lot of division going on this year, even within the, I don't know if it's the truther community. I don't even know what to call anything anymore.
I say the same thing. I say the truther, freedom, health, whatever, consciousness community, like merger of all those at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know what to call any of it anymore. And I feel like there's been a lot of infighting. It's just crazy. The MAHA movement, the MAGA movement. It's like, it's exhausting. And you've been pretty, I don't want to say outspoken, but just vocal in the midst of all of that, with some viewpoints that I think have rocked the boat a bit in that community. So I don't know if we want to go there at all, but
I'm happy to. I mean, I have my perspectives on that for sure. Like, I'll say this, and this is a very broad brushstroke. I, of course, will celebrate any actions within government that help limit the scope of government. Of course. Like, without question, that is something to be celebrated. Where there is a line, in my opinion, is if we are cheering for people and outsourcing our power to people who are put in positions of government that can easily be replaced in 4 years, and they don't do anything in said position that is doing exactly what I said before, limiting the scope of government, dismantling elements of the government from the inside. Because fundamentally, all these agencies, virtually all of them, if not all of them, are unconstitutional and anti-freedom, anti-health. Just by virtue of existing. And that's the position that I've come to. So if we're putting all of our eggs energetically and, focus wise and financially in the basket of cheering for people who are simply just replacing, quote, bad people in bad positions with, quote, better people in better positions that can easily be changed out in a couple years, 4 years time, I think that's the wrong look. I think most importantly, it's cheering for those things that are being done, like Trump saying he's dismantling the Department of Education. Amazing. That is awesome. That is objectively awesome, despite me having some issues and being incredibly skeptical of Trump and all of his campaign and his cabinet. But while we're doing that, I think there still needs to be this large focus on dissolving this conditioned belief that men and women with certain credentials or certain titles before or after their name have any moral right to dictate your life or initiate active aggression or threaten active aggression if you don't follow their dictates and commands. That's purely a conditioned belief. And it all goes back to the government supposedly derives its authority from the consent of the governed. What happens if massive amounts of people withdraw their consent? And that's, a long rabbit hole we could go down on that. But nonetheless, the point is that, yes, celebrate those actions that are helping to dissolve elements of the government, but don't outsource your power, and instead focus on cultivating your own power within yourself, within your family, within your community, and helping to create alternative systems and solutions that make this chaotic, tyrannical system obsolete. And that's kind of my meta position, if you want to call it that, on the whole thing. I think that the MAHA movement is overwhelmingly great. They're doing a great job of raising awareness to some key things while also sort of stopping at some issues, which is pretty frustrating to see. And in many cases, some of the primary voices either that are a part of the MAHA movement or tangential to the MAHA movement and loosely affiliated with the MAHA movement have since stopped discussing some of the key things that they were talking about before that are essential, in my opinion. But again, I think the focus has to be on no longer outsourcing power to anyone, whether it's a, quote, better person or bad person. It's learning to think for ourselves and cultivate like-minded community from the ground up and focus our efforts on that, because that's the only way to initiate permanent change, in my opinion. So,
yeah, I agree 100%. And I've largely been silent around the whole thing because I'm like, I've been here for 17 years, like lost my trust 17 years ago. Why would I all of a sudden jump feet first into this? Like, to me, it's just lipstick on a pig in many ways. I think, overall positive, sure. But I'm not jumping up and down, celebrating, getting overly enthusiastic, because I still got to take care of my kids. I still have to live my life, and I'm never again going to rely upon the government to have any kind of authority over my medical autonomy. None of it. Like the trust has been gone. Trust is gone. It's not going to come back, regardless of who's in charge.
Totally.
What they're saying they're going to do, who they're putting in charge. Because like you said, these can all be changed out in 4 years. You can dismantle it, but it can be built back just as quick. So
totally.
I appreciated you and some other people that were just like, okay, cool, but why are we going from why are we still putting trust in this system, period? We need to continue to build our autonomy, and learn how to be sovereign to the best of our ability. Like, it's really hard to unplug, quote unquote, from the matrix. You've got small kids and one on the way, and in the next couple of weeks here, you'll have the third?
Yeah, in a few weeks. Yep. A few weeks, third will be here.
Amazing.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought the baby was going to be born like around Confluence. I'm like, how are they going to manage that with a newborn?
No, we moved Confluence for the baby. That's why. Okay. So typically Confluence is in April, but we put it in May this year because the due date for our baby is the beginning of April. So even that's still kind of close.
But that's still pushing it. Like, Kylie needs to be in bed, not...
I'm going to have a lot of help for her, a lot of help.
Good.
So
Good. Because she already does so much with the two littles. I know you guys do a lot for your kids, but.
Can I make one more point on the sort of government thing and the MAHA movement and all that?
Please. Yeah.
So it is really interesting. And you said something there that I think is so important that I just wanted to reemphasize. Like, irrespective of who is in that position, I wasn't going to listen anyway. Like, why?
Correct.
Like, why does it require that we have a, quote, better person in any of these positions in order for what is presumably a large amount of people now in the freedom, health, truth, again, I don't know what to call it, but this movement, that could very easily, if they just decided, I no longer recognize your authority, irrespective of who's in that position, and I'm going to do what's best for me and my family. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be loving. I'm not going to infringe upon other people, but I'm going to do what's best for me, irrespective of what you say. I'm going to spend my money on things that I think are best. I'm not buying freaking Fruit Loops and things like this to begin with. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to get one of those things. Doesn't matter. I'm going to do what's best for me and my community. If you say I can't go to this school, fine. I won't go to that freaking school. I'll find a better one to go to. I'll find an alternative one. I'll start a homeschool pod. I'll get a bunch of moms and dads together and we'll put some money in a pot and pay a teacher that wants to exit that system too. And what's almost frustrating about this now happening is there are less people looking to do things like that.
Yes, because now they think they're going to be able to trust the system that's in place. And it's like, again, why are we not calling out lipstick on a pig, people? Like, what suddenly made you trust in the powers that be? It's still the powers. There's still dirty money, criminal activity. I mean, when did that? I mean, I feel like now there's even more criminal activity, honestly. Like, let's be real, people. Let's actually be, I don't know. Unbiased
as we can. Yeah, it's right. Totally.
There is no savior in the government. I'm sorry. It does not exist. You don't have a savior or a God within the government. And that's been my big thing with people. It's just like, yeah, okay. I'm glad RFK's out there. I'm glad he's saying what he's been saying. He's been fighting for families like mine for years. He's been saying what he's been saying for years. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that voice. But that's not going to give my daughter her life back. That's not going to undo the damage that was done. I still have to live with that forever. She still has to live with that forever. Our lives are completely changed forever because we had the trust in that system, And just because he's out there, that's great. And there's more awareness around it. Great. But I will be damned if I have my second child now to go through and be indoctrinated. And that's a problem. That's a thing I've been having with my husband, because we were just having the conversation last night. Because I was trying to get him to stop using freaking mouthwash for the last 5 years. Get rid of the GD Listerine, for heaven's sake. Like, stop. It's destroying your gut microbiome. Like, you don't need to disinfect your mouth.
Yeah, it's
And
not even good for your mouth. That's the
it's
weird thing about
not. And he was so stuck on this damn Listerine. And it took him having some heart issues and going to see working with Dr. Hussey and some other people that are more like-minded for him to be convinced of the Listerine as bullshit thing. And we were talking about it last night, and he was like, man, because he's really coming to a lot of realizations. I've been in my own path here for a while, and he's just kind of been like, all right, my wife is just completely insane because I've been like raw vegan and carnivore and everything in between. He's just like, okay, she's doing her thing. But last night he's like, man, the mouthwash thing really got me, because it just made me realize how everything is just complete like poison. And we're just taught like, this is the way it has to be. This is how it is. And this is safe and it's okay. And he's like, and then you start to learn everything is just, we're just being poisoned from all ends, even our mouthwash. Like, I'm trying to tell you this in my own way, but now we're having the conversations of our son, and he's so worried about it's his son, it's his only son. And it's our only neurotypical son. We've got my daughter she's not going to college. She's not going to prom. She's not going to get married or any of that stuff. It's very sad. But like, we have our son, we want everything for him. And I'm having these fights with him at 2 years old. I'm like, he's not going to a public school. He's like, well, he needs to learn the ways of the world. I'm like, there are other ways to learn. He's like, well, he needs to be taught. And I'm like, to be indoctrinated, to learn what they want him to learn, to do this. It's like, no, like, why? What does he need to? I am doing quite well, for the family. And I freaking dropped out of college, because I was like, this is bullshit. I don't like this. I hate learning this. Not saying anyone should drop out of college, but I did. My dad also passed away. My mom had cancer, and it was just like all this drama in my family. But I was just at this point, I'm like, why do I need to know this stupid math? I'm never going to use it. Like, I don't care. It's just like, I don't know.
You don't use the quadratic formula every day?
I don't know. It's like, where do you draw, when you have 2 kids and another one on the way, I'm curious your thought, like, where do you draw the line of like what your kids do need to know, how you educate them?
These are great questions.
Yeah,
these are awesome questions. I love these. Kylie and I just did I guess we called it an AUA episode, Ask Us Anything, not Ask Me Anything episode, where we talked about a lot of this stuff. And so our perspective on parenting has shifted drastically. Like, first off, the way that I grew up, I grew up around a lot of physical violence, what would be absolutely objectively physical abuse. And I have healed a lot of that, and I'm really grateful for it. Because it has taught me exactly how not to be. And there's just something about going through the depth of darkness and trauma and all of those things, then sort of transmuting that and coming out on the other end that gives you such a deep appreciation for love and for compassion and for forgiveness and things like this. But our parenting style started out as much more laissez-faire than we would like to, than we are now. And that wasn't really working, but we sort of come to a position where we really emphasize self-directed learning. We create a container of safety in our home, and there are certain boundaries that we don't go across with our kids, and certain places we don't allow them to go, certain things we don't allow them to see, of course. But when they ask why on any of those things, we explain them. We explain them very clearly because we understand that they're incredibly intelligent, beautiful gifts from God that are able to understand far more, especially as they're not conditioned, than we like to think that they can. So, for example, with my son, we eat only organic, and there's been times where we've been very strict paleo or Whole30 with him even. And it's frustrating for him, but we explain why. But then we also, when we're out and we're not buying food in our home, or if we're with friends, or even if we go out to eat, we do let him eat other things. And what's really incredible is he's already drawn a parallel on his own between really crappy ultra processed foods and feeling like crap. Like, we've taken him to birthday parties with other kids and they have normal cake and he'll eat it. And then there's been a couple times where the next day he feels horrible and he has drawn that correlation on his own. And so now you see him on his own say, no, I don't want any of that. I'm not going to feel good the next day. And
Wow.
he understands why it's important to eat the way that we eat. So we just really cultivate an environment of critical thinking. And to your husband's point that, your son needs to know the ways of the world, we're trying to create a new way for the world as I see it. And
Yeah.
again, shameless plug for Confluence. We have a kids village where if you have a family and you want to bring your kids, please do, because we have a kids village for kids aged 2 through 12 where you can just drop them off the whole day. And we have 3 sort of self-directed learning, homeschooling experts, if you want to call them that for lack of a better word, that really guide the kids throughout the whole experience of Confluence. And what you see in these incredible kids who are being raised overwhelmingly in a new way, because a lot of the people who attend Confluence, their kids are going to homeschooling pods, or they just do self-directed learning at home, or go to an alternative school like Acton Academy or a true Montessori or Waldorf school, because a lot of those have gone sideways, let's say. Yeah, which is so wild, like flying in the face of what Rudolf Steiner was all about. But that's another story. But the point is, like, these kids are reading blindfolded. These kids, like my son started reading on his own just because he really enjoyed books, and we guided him towards more reading, and he didn't show any interest in math. And we were like, okay, we're not going to pressure him to do math. And when it becomes important for him to learn math, which now he's obsessed with, like making his own money through chores, and we're teaching him things like that. And now he likes to count his money. So now he's like, oh, I need to learn math now. And he understands naturally, rather than trying to force him into a box. He is drawn towards things and he understands why it's important to learn them. And then he really is eager to learn them. And that's why he's 7 and he's reading at probably like a 13, 14, 15-year-old level right now, because he just loves reading. And that's what we guide him towards. We emphasize more of that. We help create more opportunities to read, and some of the other things in terms of the, I guess you could say, standards that are arbitrarily set by the government and other entities. He may be a little bit, quote, behind, but I don't even think he's behind. And it's like, who's to say that you need to learn those things anyway that are purely indoctrination, that aren't actually going to be useful in your life later on anyway?
Right.
And like, how many times have you heard? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness. Exactly. Or like learning biology that's not actually real biology, learning chemistry that's not actually real chemistry, like learning so many things that aren't actually true whatsoever. And on top of that, not learning things that are actually useful in life. And so by adopting this new way of being, this sort of self-directed learning approach where you just guide them towards things that they naturally feel a tendency to want to learn. And, at a younger age, we just allowed him to follow us around in our day-to-day lives and do what we do. And it's shown that he is incredibly critically thinking. Just the other day, just as an example, I know I'm rambling here, but this is like a perfect example of his mind. And I think this is overwhelmingly the mind of kids that are being raised in this new way, where you're not dictatorially telling them, you must learn this, you must be this way, you do this because I said so. You cultivate an environment of critical thinking, you allow them to ask questions, and you just create a container of safety with a spectrum for them to deviate off the path a little bit and learn on their own. The other day, I was putting him to bed and I was explaining, because we'd never really told him the story of like why we eat the way that we eat. We just do. And I was explaining the story about Kylie, my wife, and on his own, he looks at me and says, Dad, is that why they put celebrities in commercials for this bad food? Because they want people who really, really like celebrities to think that the food is good. And if the celebrities like it, it must be good. Something like that. And I was like, yeah, exactly. And he was like, is that also why, like, at sometimes fast food places, they put little cartoons that a lot of kids like on the boxes and stuff like that, so kids will want it? Like, exactly right. And he came up with that on his own. And I'm like, it's moments like that where I'm like, yeah, we're doing this right. And it is tough because there's no correct model on how to approach a new way of parenting and a new way of educating children. But it really comes from the core understanding, in my opinion, that they are born with innate
Really?
intelligence that we just don't understand logically, but it's there. It's there. And when we're not indoctrinating them and when we're not doing our best not to traumatize them, I mean, shit, like,
Yeah,
sorry,
I
excuse my
know.
language, but we're like, it's going to happen. It's just part of
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
Really is just part of life. But when we're doing our best to be very conscious and intentional and loving and kind and just cultivating the environment that I explained before, I mean, I really don't think you can do worse than public school. Like, I don't think you can absolutely do any worse than
No.
that. So
No.
they're gonna have a leg up on the rest of society as it is. And you see the results. And there's a large holistic health oriented community in Austin, and then events like Confluence where other kids that are kind of like ours are there. And it's like, wow, these kids are absolutely incredible,
Yeah.
incredible. And so I questioned it at first, and we questioned ourselves, like, is this the right way? Like, what if he falls behind in social
Yeah.
studies? Like, who cares? It doesn't matter. And my
Yeah, like
kid,
why does he need to
brilliant.
know social studies? Like again,
Exactly.
it's like somebody else's version of like why like do I ever use any of that shit that I learned? No.
No.
Like that's where I feel like we have to question it. And that's, my husband went to Georgia Tech and was like very involved in sports and he wanted to play professional basketball. But of course, he got an injury and had to get surgery and that whole thing. But he was very like straight laced, never smoked a cigarette. I don't know what he was thinking with me because I've just always been like completely out there and wild. Um, to a point, I'm like, why me? What was I don't understand that one, but
That's funny.
I know why I chose him because I knew if I didn't have like a strong like centered down to earth person, I'd end up in a freaking commune somewhere and God knows what kind of a bad situation doing God knows what. Like I knew I was not destined to be grounded. And so that's always been like a thing with us. But when it comes to the kids, like he's coming around to understanding how corrupt everything is and how like I'm like, and why do we need to know that? And that's not even true. Like he's coming to me every day. He's like, this isn't true. I'm like, I know. Like it's
That's what I've
not.
been saying.
This is not a
Right.
news flash to me. Like I know.
That's great.
But yeah, it's like when it comes to kids, you do want the best for them, and they are like I don't know if you listen to Bruce Lipton and he talks about the first 7 years of how their brain waves are just completely different. But what we do immediately, even in like daycares, and like my husband's like he needs to go to a preschool. I'm like not a regular one, like maybe a pod
Right.
of like-minded people, but not a regular blue lit fluorescent light preschool indoors like a glorified daycare. Absolutely not. Like, no, I'm not doing it. It's like you put them in those environments, you start teaching them this like curriculum of things. And I feel like you're completely ruining their ability to tap into those brainwaves and be creative and be how they're supposed to be. I remember when I was there in, what was it, July, I guess, or August? No, it was July.
I still can't believe that was that long. Like, that is
Oh,
wild to me.
it is crazy.
Yeah.
And I remember you had, I think it was just that morning, the morning I got there, your son had been like, Mom is pregnant. Like he knew it.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think. No, okay. So that would have been just after we did find out that Kylie was
Yeah.
pregnant, that you
You
were here.
found out she
Okay.
was, but he knew
Yeah, he
before
knew.
you guys knew. Yeah.
Yeah, so that story is pretty wild, but again, we have stuff like this happen with our son and daughter all the time. Like our daughter describes being in the womb
Yeah.
on her own.
Yeah.
This is when she was still 2, I believe. She said it was loud and there was a snake in there with me, and I was in the water, and then I died, and then I was here. It's like snake, umbilical cord. She was in the water, and we didn't say any of this. She just said it on her own. She was
Wow.
like, Charlie, do you remember being in the womb? And she says, yeah. And then she describes all these very specific things, and also described hearing a bear. And like, if you hear the sound of the heartbeat of the mother in the womb, it does kind of sound like a wah, ah. So
Yep.
that was incredible. But then our son, he's just said some unbelievably incredible things. I think this is another piece is we really do not shut down what would be deemed woo-woo. And I think a lot of parents
Mm.
are realizing this now, the importance of cultivating these what you could call spiritual or psychic gifts that I think are innate to every human being. And just like
Yes.
some human
Yes.
beings have a higher tendency to be able to jump high or run fast or read really well or play a piano, it's the same way when it comes to these so-called psychic phenomena. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of it makes sense when it comes to the biofield ether. And we can
Yes.
talk about that if we want to. I have my ideas on how all of it works. Because it also deals with the human heart. And I've just really tied some stuff together after interviewing Stephen Hussey. Anyway, my son, so my wife and I were not trying to get pregnant. There was no expectation. We just weren't careful, And 4 days before what would have been her period, we're making breakfast in the kitchen. Again, not talking about it at all, nothing. Son walks right up to my wife and nonchalantly, matter-of-factly says, "Mom, you're pregnant." We're like, "What?" And he smiles and goes, shrugs his shoulders and he says, "You're pregnant." Like, "Why do you say that?" And he's like, "I just know." And then he walked away. And then 4 days later, missed period, took a test, pregnant. We're like, yeah. So
They
and then
know.
you
My
ask him,
daughter, every time I was pregnant, when I was going through all the infertility, my daughter said, "I knew you were pregnant before you did every single time. And I also knew when you lost the baby before you did. And I didn't want to tell you." She said, "Because your belly had a white glow around it when you were pregnant. And then when the baby was gone, it was brown." I was
incredible,
like, huh?
incredible. And I fully believe that.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Oh, yeah. And she had conversations with my son when it's crazy now because he's 2 and he just sings all the time. Everything's a song. It's hilarious. It's a comedy show all the time. He's singing all the time. I'm like, I don't even know what song that is. And he does a little dance. And like when I was pregnant, she would spell on her letterboard. She's like, "Mom, he's so loud. It's so annoying. He sings all the time." I'm like, "What are you talking about? He's in my belly right now." She's like, "No, he is so loud. He sings all night long. He keeps me awake at night singing."
oh my goodness, that is so
What?
cool.
Yeah. And this whole thing with like the telepathy tapes is big. And I know you've got the neuroscientist from telepathy tapes coming to Confluence. But I'm like listening to this series. I'm like, yes, this is my daughter. My daughter is one of these kids, like 110%. And I know a lot of the kids in the series. But I'm like, I think all of our kids have these abilities, but they're being shut down by our systems. Like I think they're all born this way. I think we all.
I actually have a theory of why nonverbal autistic kids. I'm sure you've thought about it quite a bit too. So I'd love to hear if you have any ideas. Yeah, even though you're interviewing me for your podcast, but I have a theory on why nonverbal autistic kids have a higher capacity to tap into these things. Sort of, it's almost like inherent to their beingness.
Yeah.
And I'll just summarize it briefly. First off, I want to say I completely agree with you. I think every child has an ability to do this. After witnessing 2 different sets of kids read Blindfolded, like literally seeing it with my own 2 eyes, to the point that this one kid in Mexico, I was at an event in Acapulco, and just to, I guess, lend more credence to this, Andy Kaufman was with me, Ian Smith Fitness was with me, my friend Yerasimos, whom some people may know from Here for the Truth podcast. A lot of people were with me and we were all watching this happen. Anyway, little 8-year-old kid and his 10-year-old brother, both reading Blindfolded. I pulled up a random paragraph on my phone, put a piece of paper over my phone. Andy had the blindfold on. He still read every single word on my phone with no problem. And so like seeing that, and the reason I bring that up is because both those children, their mom, and then my friend Dr. Edith, her kids can both read Blindfolded. She teaches these courses on Zoom right now. Actually, she's teaching other kids how to do it as well, activating kids' ability to do this. Both of them say that every kid can learn this. Literally any child can learn this. It does become more difficult after age 13, but all of us have these abilities sort of untapped inside of us. Anyway, so on the nonverbal autistic kid thing, so I think that overwhelmingly this physical realm that we're in this modern way of living, we are inundated with toxicity, like insane amounts of toxicity, both physically and metaphysically, in terms of like the poisons in our food, our medicines, so to speak, air, water, etc. But then also non-native EMFs and just lack of time amongst harmonious electromagnetic fields and that we find in nature. I think like, yes, there needs to be an emphasis on the harmful non-native EMFs that we're around, but also more important to that is, okay, the solution is getting out amongst nature, amongst harmonious EMFs. Anyway, because we're inundated with all these things, the physical body is just in a state of tension for a lot of us, virtually 24/7, right? In a state of almost perpetual fight or flight.
Yes.
And I think likewise, whether you want to call it an effect of the morphogenic field or just this point in history, I don't really know. But nonetheless, what I observe is there's a huge bifurcation where a lot more people are waking up, and then the system, if you want to call it that, is becoming a lot more tyrannical, sort of this split that's happening at the same time. But the effect that it creates is that I think souls that are incarnating right now on Earth, and I'm not going to make claims regarding reincarnation or anything like that. I'm just saying souls that are coming into the physical body at this point in time are coming into a field of consciousness, essentially the morphogenic field, the etheric field, whatever you want to call it, that is already at a level, they're like being imprinted with a deeper tendency towards understanding their spiritual nature, let's say, their spiritual gifts, because a lot of people are waking up to that stuff right now.
Yeah.
And anyone who virtually anyone that I know that has increased intuitive abilities will describe that they are much more physically sensitive to things, right?
Oh, yes.
And like my son, for example, he is incredibly intuitive, but like I said, if he eats even just a little bit something bad, his body feels it, and he almost becomes somewhat disassociative a little bit.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is when he has these moments where he almost seems to disassociate and he's not there. And my wife and I describe it as he doesn't seem to be in his body right now.
Yeah. Yes.
After he pops out of that, he has these incredible insights, just incredible insights that we're like, where did that come from?
Wow.
So what I think is happening is twofold. It's both that the souls that are incarnating now into these physical bodies that are inundated with toxicity physically and metaphysically have a natural tendency to understand their spiritual nature. And because of that, they're already very, very, very sensitive to the physical body. But also, if the physical body is inundated with acute or increased toxicity relative to the rest of the people, it's almost like their soul, I won't say is not fully embodied. It is, but it's like this physical body is too much for me. Yeah. So I'm going to sort of relate better to my etheric astral, my soul, like the non-physical body, the biofield. And because they're relating to that more, they are much more readily able to tap into the mechanisms and the happenings and the functions of the biofield. And it's also likewise an adaptation too, because if you take a kid and put them in, or you take anyone and put them in darkroom. I actually just did an episode interviewing someone who's done 50 days in darkness total. They describe how their smell increases like crazy, their intuitive capacity increases like crazy. They actually like have visions and can hear like way, way, way far away.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's both of those things, an adaptation, but then also because the physical body's too much, it's like they're somewhat detached from it. And because they're somewhat detached from it, their biofield is the mechanism that they communicate. And we all have these abilities. It's just that for them, it's turned on automatically. That's what I think. And I'm excited to talk to Diane about that at Confluence because I want to hear what she has to say. But what do you think about everything that I just said?
I agree 100%. And like the thing with the telepathy tapes, everyone's sending it to me. Everyone's like, have you heard of it? I'm like, yes. The kids that I know that were in the series, the boy in episode 9, his mother, I don't know if you've listened to it or not.
I've listened up to episode 7.
Okay. Episode 9 is a tearjerker. I mean, I know the family, so of course I was sobbing. But the boy in episode 9, he passed. His mother taught my daughter how to letterboard when she was 9. And he suffered from seizures, like really horrible seizures, and he was actually, the week before he passed, he was going to come here because my daughter had been in the ICU with the seizure for a week, and she had just started having seizures. So he really had wanted to come over and just be with her and spend time with her because he knew what she was going through, but he ended up passing like the week after he was supposed to come over. A lot of these kids, what people is like, oh, telepathy tapes, blah, blah, blah. It's like this cute little thing. I'm like, these kids they have a lot of physical issues.
Yeah.
They have a lot of chronic illness. Like the road that these kids have chosen is really difficult. And I think what you're saying about the physical body is like 100% spot on. Because, we've dealt with, tomorrow we have to have freaking surgery for my daughter in the morning because she's had a sinus infection for 3 months. And I'm convinced she's stuck something up there and it's like abscessing at this point. It's just always something. And it's horrible. It's a hard existence. And my daughter has told us several times she chose this. Like she spelled on the letterboards one time, she said, the others and I agreed that I would come and I knew I wasn't going to be able to talk. But this is what I chose. I knew this was what was going to happen the whole time, even though I knew it would be hard. So it's so multifaceted, but I think you just nailed it with the sensitivity of the physical body and like the other things not being able to, like they can't speak. And so they can tune in to vibrations. And she's told us she can hear lights and she can, they're very telepathic and they're very tuned in to things. I think we would be if we weren't so inundated
right.
with the programming, so it's wild. It really is wild. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing and sad because it's like,
it's heartbreaking.
I'm sure for you, like knowing that your daughter said that she chose this, did that take some of the weight off? But then at the same time, it's like, yeah, but this is horrible to witness you suffer at the same time.
Yeah, it's like mixed feelings, because I've still, for years, I just blamed myself and felt guilty and angry and just like let those feelings they were like poison for me, and then it's like in my mid 30s, I've got like Hashimoto's and fibroids and like all these chronic health conditions. And a lot of that was the anger and the guilt that I was allowing to just fester in my body, Totally. And it's like, I had to at some point let go of that and say, well, she told me this is what she chose. And I was doing the best I could at the time with the information that I had. I didn't purposefully do this, but that's the whole other thing about kind of becoming alternative mindset with health is that I think the reason why so many other people have their eyes closed and their heads in the sand is because if they admitted that we were right, if they understood the depth of like what they're doing to their children and their families, they wouldn't be able to like live with themselves, Totally. They wouldn't. And so I think that's why it gets so heated. And one of the reasons this gets so heated and gets so charged is that they don't want to admit that the way they've been raising their families and kids is potentially harmful and wrong, Yeah,
it can be too overbearing when it comes to the shame and guilt that arises from that. And it's like, damn, I have empathy for that. I've made mistakes in my life, and I think all of us have that, where it's like, damn, I feel horrible for those things, but you have to learn to forgive yourself. Like you absolutely have to. It's essential for you, especially if you're taking care of another being. If you're in a relationship with someone, that relationship will suffer. Your ability to parent will suffer if you're not forgiving yourself. So if at the very least, you have to do it for them. You have to do it for them.
Yeah, exactly. There's always another level.
Yeah, there is.
You have to get to, and the kids will push you. If you're not so stuck on your own agenda, there's always another level. There's always another awareness. It's continual. It's a school that in our own school, that we're continually being asked of.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah,
totally.
Well, I would love to. I know we've been going for about an hour, but we're talking about virology, but with the caveat of you being a parent and having kids, because this is something I've run into with both of my kids, of understanding this viewpoint and going through Tom Cowan's new biology curriculum, you know, it's hard to wrap your brain around when you do get kids that have fevers and get sick. And my son dealt with eczema, which I'll eventually talk about on the show. But I'm like, it's just, how do you wrap your brain around that whole deal when you have kids and have to deal with these childhood illnesses, all of that? So,
yeah. Oh man, I have a lot of thoughts on that. So
yeah.
I think the biggest hang up for parents, I'm just going to jump ahead and not go into the details on virology for the sake of this. I can send you my recent presentation on that. I did a 2.5 hour presentation.
Oh, wow.
Published for my podcast that I'm sending everyone to, that answers all the, I guess you could say, the minutia, the intricate details of viral isolation and how this paradigm has absolutely never been proven. So the big hang up for parents, and I'd say even most people, is, okay, well then how do you explain, quote, contagion? Or how do you explain, I don't like to call it contagion because it implies that there's particles being passed. That's the implication, right? That we're sort of hung up on. And I think it's really helpful that we get out of that mindset in order to think outside that box. So I say, how do you explain the phenomenon of 2 or more people getting sick in the same space with similar symptoms? That's really what we're trying to get at. How do you explain 2 or more people getting sick in the same space with similar symptoms? And the first thing that I'll say, and again, I'm jumping ahead, so you have to sort of let's assume for the sake of this conversation that viruses have never been proven to exist or be the cause of illness, that bacteria and fungi, although they exist, have never been demonstrated to be the causative agent in illness. And further, this belief system that healthy people become sick when exposed to sick people or their bodily fluids is absolutely a belief system that is totally unproven and arguably disproven at this point. So that's the frame for what I'm about to say next. That's a lot without the proper context. And again, I'll just send to Sarah. She can link that specific episode in the show notes or something like that. Okay. So with that being said, the burden of proof lies on the individual making the positive claim. That's a maxim of law. Meaning if, for example, Chuck says that he saw Johnny shoot Bill at a gas station and kill Bill, right? I'll try to remember these names. Chuck saw Johnny shoot Bill at a gas station and Bill then died. And, Johnny's now being charged with murder. And the burden of proof in that situation, we know this in court, is on the individual bringing forth the positive claim. So as proof of that, Chuck pulls up his local gas station's CCTV, and it shows a guy who's around Johnny's stature, wearing a sweatshirt that Johnny typically wears, shooting Bill, and Bill then dies. And then this guy drives off. So that's the, quote, evidence that is brought forward, right? Mm-hmm. And then in response to that, Johnny says, well, wait a second. On this date, let's say this happened on March 1st, 2023. On this date, I actually have direct evidence that I was in Bali and this murder happened in Wisconsin. I couldn't possibly be the one involved because here's an Instagram live that I did in Bali. Here's pictures that I took. Here's my plane receipts. Here's my hotel receipts. Here's all the other people. Here's a notice that I put on my apartment door saying that I'm going to be gone. And we had maintenance people come in. My car was parked at the airport. I have all of these things that I can clearly demonstrate and falsify this idea that I was the one who murdered Bill. Right? So the evidence you've put forward is not direct evidence. It's inferential evidence. It's secondary or tertiary so-called evidence. And the burden of proof is on you to directly prove that. And I have just falsified the idea that it could be me. Of course, in that situation, when it comes to law, the overwhelming majority of us would say, oh yeah, there's no way that it's Johnny. Like it's very clear that it's not Johnny. So we're going to have to go back to the drawing board to figure out who it is. And what people do when you have falsified this idea that a submicroscopic so-called pathogenic particle consisting of a proteinaceous coat surrounding a core of genetic material, which is the definition for a virus, falsifying the idea that that exists or causes illness, when you can't come up with a better explanation for what causes these phenomena, likewise, when you can't come up with, well, if it's not Johnny, then who did kill Bill? What a lot of people do is like, well, until you can come up with a better explanation for who killed Bill, we're going to blame Johnny. Meaning, until you can come up with a better explanation for what does cause these phenomena, we're just going to go with this paradigm that we have because it's the quote best fit model. But it's like, no. We falsified the idea that it could be Johnny. There's no possible way it could be Johnny. We've showed demonstrably that it's not Johnny. Well, it's the best fit model that we have. So Johnny, I'm sorry, until we can find someone who did kill Bill, you're guilty for Bill's murder. That's what people do when it comes to this paradigm. And it's a mentality that we really have to get out of and also be okay with saying, I don't know with certainty what is the cause of this phenomenon, but I'm going to continue to explore. And with that, we have several plausible explanations for what causes the phenomenon of two or more people getting sick in the same space. And just to further emphasize this point, I want to share a piece of Daniel Roytis's book. So he wrote a book, Can You Catch a Cold, where he examined over 200. Have you interviewed him yet?
I haven't. I need to.
Okay, that would be an incredible interview. I can summarize his book pretty well, but obviously he would do it justice because he wrote it. But in his book, he scours the scientific literature looking at all of the studies that he can find. He did tremendous amounts of research trying to find studies that clearly demonstrate this idea that that people become sick, healthy people become sick when exposed to sick people or their bodily fluids. And he, in his book, highlights over 200 studies on this topic. And the important thing to note is in virtually almost every single case in these studies attempting to demonstrate this idea, they fail to demonstrate contagion. Now, the ones that did succeed and what I mean by succeed is that healthy people did become sick when exposed to sick people or their bodily fluids. They didn't run proper controls. They didn't account for the placebo-nocebo effect, and I'm going to get to that in a second. They used unnatural, quote, modes of transmission, like taking infected blood from a sick person and injecting it sometimes into the brain of an individual, sometimes into the arm. These totally unnatural ways to, quote, prove this paradigm. And then in every single case, no double-blind randomized controlled trial was conducted, and then no pathogenic agent was actually found in the mucus of the individual, right? So to further emphasize this point, in his book, he also covers things like mass psychogenic illness and social contagion. And one of the examples that he gives, which is absolutely incredible, is in New Zealand, I don't remember what year it was, but in New Zealand, this antidepressant had gone off patent, meaning that other companies could make their own generic version of that same drug. And this one specific generic version, a lot of people started reporting side effects to whatever New Zealand's adverse event reporting system is, right? And across the board, there are 27 common side effects that were being reported, 27 common ones. The mainstream media decided to run a story on this generic antidepressant. And for whatever reason, we can only speculate, when they shared this story amongst the masses, putting this story, broadcasting it to everyone, right? They only shared 6 of those 27 common symptoms. What then followed after this was that adverse events reports skyrocketed, but only in the 6 symptoms that the mainstream media had shared about, not in the other 21 symptoms. So this is a perfect example of mass psychogenic illness where you're fed with an idea and it can lead to real physical effects amongst a population of people. I wrote an article on the various other explanations for loss of taste and smell, and this is one of many other explanations. Trust me, there's plenty of other ways to characterize what happens with loss of taste and smell, even for an extended period of time. And interestingly enough, in that article, I highlight how the LA Times put out an article, I want to say in the early 2000s or the 1990s, that openly discussed how with the common cold, you can't experience loss of taste and smell. It's fairly common. I think 1 in every 3 people experiences that, and even highlights in that article that there are a number of people who experience the common cold who lose their taste and smell and never regain it. And this is back in early 2000s or the 1990s. So again, this is not a new phenomenon, but harkening back to what Danny Reutz has highlighted with mass psychogenic illness as it pertains to being told something in mass, what happens when you hear over and over and over and over and over again, you'll experience loss of taste and smell, you experience loss of taste and smell, you experience loss of taste and smell, you experience loss of taste and smell. You'll know you have this deadly virus because you'll experience loss of taste and smell. I mean, it's totally possible that people actually experience the physical effects by subconsciously believing in that idea, especially when it's done in community and we have overlapping biofields, et cetera, sort of sharing this information, this thought pattern amongst each other. So with that being said, when it comes to, this is a roundabout way of saying, when it comes to 2 or more people experiencing similar symptoms in the same space, that's one possible explanation, is mass psychogenic illness. Mm-hmm. Other possible explanation is when we're living in community with each other, and let's say we live, I don't know why I keep saying Wisconsin, but let's say we live in Wisconsin again in this case, right? And in the summertime, when we're in Wisconsin, we spend a lot of time outside because there's plenty of sunlight. The weather's really nice. We're putting our bare feet on the earth. We're getting adequate time in nature. We're not inside amongst the 150 plus toxic chemicals that are in modern homes. Even if we're living a holistic lifestyle, we're not as exposed to non-native EMFs and things like this. We're getting that negative charge from the earth. We're getting that full spectrum of light from the sun, exactly what we need for the waters of our body in order to maintain and enhance that negative charge in the 4th phase waters of our body. And then as we move into the wintertime, what most of us do is spend more time indoors, spend less time in the sun. Inevitably, regardless of if we spend time outside, we're getting less sunlight, but we're probably not putting our bare feet on the earth. We're probably not connecting with the earth as much. I think another thing that's really important is if you analyze nature during the winter months, virtually every other mammal is slowing down.
Right.
Is becoming internal. Nice bottle. I love the blue bottle. Got mine too. But they're slowing down. They're slowing down. And what we do in the wintertime is the exact opposite. We freaking go nuts and like, oh, Christmas is coming up. And then also
New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
Like gym at 5 a.m.
Exactly. Yeah. Like do all this stuff, the exact opposite of what nature does. Nature's going internal, reflecting, getting more present, getting more centered, conserving energy. And we're doing the exact opposite while spending more time indoors, while getting less sunlight, while spending less time detoxifying, less time sweating, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think there's this brilliant mechanism of the body called symptoms, coughing, sneezing, throwing up. And what I like to say is happening there is the 4th phase water of our bodies, of our cells, has reached a certain threshold of toxicity and it heats up. That's why we get a fever. So it can become less viscous, so it can flow more easily. So we cough, we have diarrhea, we throw up, we have stuff come out of our skin, things like this. And it's us, our body's brilliantly responding to reaching a threshold of toxicity in the winter months. And we have the nerve to think that our bodies are broken, caught a virus, and we're in the midst of, quote, flu season. It's our bodies responding to modern life in the way that we're living, even if we're living a more holistic lifestyle. And what might happen when we're living in community with each other, exposed to the same environment, doing all those things that I just described in community. We might start getting sick around the same times because we're all reaching that same threshold at the same time. And then we have the nerve to think that something is being passed and we need to isolate from each other. Mm-hmm. Community is essential. It's absurd. In the foundations of Ayurvedic, traditional Chinese medicine, contagion wasn't even considered as a mechanism for disease at all. And it's because they had this deep understanding and deep connection to the natural world. So I'd imagine they probably weren't getting as sick as much as we do nowadays. But ultimately, they knew that disease was something that came from within. Yeah. But other possible explanations as well, I'd like to share. And it's not really me asserting what is, it's more just asking questions. How do we describe how do we describe women syncing up on their menstrual cycles? How do we describe, you have someone that's talking about you and they're thousands of miles away, and then you hit them up and they're like, were your ears ringing? Or how do you
Yeah.
explain being around someone and feeling that they have bad vibes, or feeling that they're lying to you, or feeling that they have good vibes? How do we explain these things?
Yeah.
Is there other things going on? And I think absolutely yes. The human biofield is, I would say, fairly well established at this point. And we know that these devices that we have communicate via overlapping electromagnetic fields and frequencies and signals. How do we know that our bodies don't have the exact same thing? And how do we know that when I've reached a certain threshold of toxicity, I might not communicate to other people around me that I'm in community with and have our biofield syncing constantly? Like, hey, I'm detoxifying because I've reached my threshold. Like, maybe it's time for us all to do that at the same time and really slow down. So my dog likes it, so I think I'm right. But yeah, that's kind of, and there's plenty of other plausible explanations for what causes these phenomena, but we're so myopically focused on the, dare I say, disproven germ paradigm that we don't consider these other possible explanations, many of which I personally think are metaphysical.
Yeah. Oh, there's definitely metaphysical. And it's like my kids, even though they're so different, James is 2, Alexis is almost 18. Well, she'll be 18 in December, so it's a while away, but she doesn't speak, but they're so connected. You know, when he was struggling with eczema, which we figured that out, thank God. I think that was brought on by a nervous system dysregulation, because when she started having seizures, that's when the eczema started, and he was a baby, you know. And I talked to Tom about it offline, because that's when I had decided to do Tom's new biology clinic, because I'm like, I don't understand this. Like, I did everything right. Like, I don't get this. You know, I did everything I possibly could. Nothing. He's had no interventions, nothing, like zero, perfect birth, like left on the cord till it turned white, like everything. I don't get this. And Tom was like, what happens? How does a little baby express that they're scared because something's wrong with their sister, who they're very connected? Like, he's very connected to her. She was talking to him when he was in the womb. She said they would stay up all night talking when they were
cool.
When I was pregnant. She said she was upset when he was born because they wouldn't be able to talk the same way that they did. She was like, that was the clearest that we're ever going to be able to communicate was when he was in the womb. I think that they still communicate, but anytime his skin would flare up, there was something with her. She was in the hospital. She was like having like something was going on. And I'm just like, yeah, it's wild, you know, and that could have created some dysbiosis in the gut, because we've done some different things to support his gut naturally, and found a holistic pediatrician who's done some things like LDA, which is been tremendous for us. But I always am like, but why? You know, why did the body do that? Instead of looking at a pathogen or a virus or an imbalance of bacteria or whatever, I'm just always like, but why did his body do that? Like, right. Why is I still don't understand a lot of the times why her body is doing different things, where it's a continual thing I'm trying to figure out and support. But I always ask that question, like, why did my body get golf ball sized fibroids in my mid 30s? And they've never returned since then. Like, I always ask that to people. And that's why when people come to me, I'm sure you get it all the time, people like with these long stories of symptoms and issues that they're having. I'm like, oh, we need to talk about your life. We need to talk about what you're doing on a daily basis, how your lifestyle, where you live, like what you're eating. It's not just let's isolate a bacteria or a pathogen and blame everything on that. Like, it's a response to some other sort of vibration or resonance, or like.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Or take a nonsensical blood test that's a snapshot in time and then make life-changing health decisions based on said blood test.
I just had this conversation in my group this morning of like, her naturopath says she's low in zinc and she needs to take zinc. I'm like, but you're eating healthy grass-fed meat, like you're eating tons of zinc. So we got to ask, why is your body doing that? What's going on? You know? rather than just throwing you a supplement, which might
Totally.
temporarily be helpful, but we need to understand why your body is doing that. There's always a reason why that's happening. Um, so yeah, it's a, everyone wants like a black and white answer
Right.
and a pill for every ill. And this way of looking at the human body doesn't give that,
No, it doesn't. But I don't know. It just like in that situation with your son getting the eczema the same time that your daughter is having all these seizures, like when you can step out of the sort of pathogen germ-based paradigm, it really allows you to see it in a completely different way and consider other options. And really the position that I've come to is the overwhelming majority of health issues, I would say, at least have some emotional component.
Oh, totally.
I'm totally convinced on that
Totally.
now. And that's after stepping out of the germ paradigm. It's like, you can't not come to that conclusion because you see such a strong correlation. Like even in my own life, I
Yeah.
know that my symptoms are inextricably linked to times that I was just perpetually stressed. Like every single time
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Ian Mitchell, you've had him on your podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first time I talked with Ian was when I was first early pregnant, and I told him the story of my son and how he had come to me. His spirit had come to me in 2016 and was like, because I wasn't thinking about having another baby, and I had this little boy jumping up and down, like, "Hey, you can bring me here. I'm healthy. Like, if you want to bring me here, you can. I'm healthy, and I want to come." Because I was not even going to have any more kids. And I was telling Ian the story, and he's like, "Yeah, I can confirm that's the same soul that you have now." Because I was so scared because I had so many miscarriages, and I was like, "Is this pregnancy going to make it?" And Ian was like, "No, that's the same. I can confirm that's the same soul." He's like, "But I have to tell you, he's going to be very sensitive, like very, very sensitive. And so you need to be prepared for this." And I was just like, okay, well, he's just going to be very sensitive. Lo and behold, the kid breaks out in head to toe eczema when his sister is having seizures. And I'm like, oh shit, he was right. It's just,
Right.
it's wild. It's totally wild because we just think we know how things work. But there's this whole other layer, and you've got people like Ian, who I consider like a polymath, like a wizard of sorts.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Well, that's why his company is named what it is.
Wizard science. Yeah. Like he's a true wizard.
Yeah.
But he told me, I'm like, okay, this is true. So yeah, I think anybody listening to the show, some of this may have been out of the realm of their comfort, but if that is, I just implore you to ask if the current paradigm that you have for health is working for you,
Amen.
and be willing to be amazed and look at things through a different lens, because I feel like we really know like this much. And then once you start studying water, it's like, we know nothing.
Totally. 100%. Like water is the most ubiquitous thing in this reality, or one of the most ubiquitous things. And we know nothing about it, like literally not a thing about it. We're just really learning how water works. And I think like the last thing that I'll say, to add to your point, we know this much. So mainstream science says that we can only perceive 0.0035% of the available electromagnetic spectrum. One thing I like to add to that, though, is I'd be really interested to know how they determined with any sort of, assertiveness certainty that what is the available electromagnetic spectrum. But nonetheless, we can only see 0.0035% of the available electromagnetic spectrum. So that tells me that there are so many things happening in, above, around us all times metaphysically that we just can't perceive. And I think we have such a major tendency to think that we are only physical beings having a physical experience. And, mainstream science is really rooted in that. That's why we can't explain this phenomenon. Let's come up with a theoretical particle virus. We can't explain exactly what causes this. Come up with a theoretical particle graviton. Like they come up with these theoretical particles to explain things that they can't explain physically. And they're like, oh, they presume we just must not be able to see them, but they must be there because we know this effect is real. And I think they're looking in the wrong place. Likewise, we're looking in the wrong place often. I think it's metaphysical.
Yeah. Have you looked into Dan Winter's stuff at all?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. One of my good friend, Dr. Pugh, is like way into his stuff, and she's
Sarah Pugh, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love for you to go on. I mean, for her to come on your show at some point. I know she's in the UK, but she, some of the conversations we have after she's been listening to Dan and like she's doing this, I'm just like, yeah,
I need to get her on. Yeah, I've had like 3 people recommend that to me. That'd be an amazing conversation.
You should. Yeah, she's amazing. She's my daughter's godmother, and she's a really special human. But yeah, I think she remote views in my house sometimes.
Oh man, that's like my friend Eileen McCusick. So. I really appreciate that she did this. I gave her permission to like check in on my energy, and she hasn't done it in a while. But there's this one time she texted me out of nowhere and was like, your right foot is hurting because blah, 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 blah. And like, she had no way to know that my right foot was hurting, but it was, and my right foot was hurting. And what she said was absolutely spot on. And it was like, how do you know? It's because of these metaphysical happenings that we just don't readily perceive. And a lot of people are really learning and able to tap into that. And I think we all can.
Yeah, I think we can too. And I love that. I love that. I think that's where we leave it with the conversation, is that don't limit yourself, don't limit that potential that you can tap into. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. So much fun, Alec. And, let's do a plug for all of your things, Confluence, your community. Let's talk about all those things in case people want to connect with you on a deeper level and join some of the things that you have.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This felt like just a fun conversation and not a podcast at all, which I really appreciate, because that's what I try to do with my show.
Yeah.
So thank you. Like there's multiple moments where I was like, oh yeah, we're recording right now. I'm not just having a conversation with Sarah. So yeah, Confluence, May 7th through the 12th. 2025 Mother's Day weekend. We're going to have a lot of programming tailored towards the women and Mother's Day. It's really going to be incredible. Obviously, Sarah's speaking, Carrie Bennett's speaking, Gerald Pollack's speaking, Diane Hennessy-Powell from Telepathy Tapes, Dr. Kelly Brogan, Eileen McCusick. I could go on and on with our lineup this year. It's like absolutely incredible. Like when I look at the full list myself, I'm geeking out. Like I cannot wait, because I can see how Diane's work relates to Gerald's work. Oh, I forgot one, Veda Austin. She's speaking now too. Like I completely forgot. That slipped my mind. I can see how all of their work sort of relates together. And I'm so excited for people to start thinking along the same thought patterns of how all those things relate together too. So I'm just so stoked for that. And so our community platform, where hopefully by the time this comes out, we'll have launched it. But I'm sure you get this all the time. I know I do. People hitting me up. I'm really struggling to find like-minded community around me. I'm really struggling to find a practitioner of this type or a pediatrician, because I need, for whatever my unique circumstance is, someone who is like-minded, so I know that they're not going to force my kids to get any of these products. And so many people are having these issues, finding like-minded farms, alternative schools near them. And we have been working for the last 3 years to create a platform that's fully in the private, that it functions like an app, but is web-based, where you can type in your zip or postal code, set a geolocation, custom geolocation, and then set a custom radius, and then it'll populate all of the like-minded farms, like-minded alternative schools, like-minded practitioners of every type, and like-minded people around you. And we're really stoked for this, because this is so needed in this space. I'm sure you get those questions all the time, and I do too. And I think community is absolutely essential. It's awesome that we've all connected virtually like this. I'm so grateful for that. But now I think it's really time we start pulling these virtual connections into real life in-person community. I think it's going to be essential going forward. So that's the resource we've created. And you can find that, I'm sure, in the show notes. Sarah will link it, but also thewayforward.com. And forward is spelled FWRD. So thewayfwrd.com.
I'm so excited for that too. I mean, because I'm going to be hopefully utilizing that to find resources for my kids and family as well. So I think I'm super excited about that. And yeah, that'll all be down in the show notes for anybody watching. And yeah, this has just been so much fun. And it didn't feel like I was doing a podcast recording. It felt like just hanging out with a friend. So I appreciate you, Alec. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. We went everywhere in this conversation, so that's why it was like not a podcast. It was just hanging out with Sarah. So yeah, it was good.
I love it. Thank you so much for listening to the Evolving Wellness Podcast. Just a quick little reminder, this is not medical advice nor meant to be taken as a substitute for working one-on-one with a healthcare practitioner. And if you enjoy the show, please head on over to Apple or Spotify to leave the show up to a 5-star review. If you're over on YouTube, please leave us a like, leave us a comment. I really appreciate you for being here, for listening to the show, and your support means the world to me as I continue to try to pull guests from around the world to bring you informative content to empower you to make decisions about your own health. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.